So we will begin. So hello and welcome everyone. My name is Lisa Stillwell. I am a proud city Democrat and am so geeked about our session tonight. Okay, so this is the Lancaster County Democratic Committee sponsoring this event, which will feature people from We the People, which is a nonpartisan organization basically working for reality-based improvement for all of our lives here in Pennsylvania. So the speakers here tonight are going to be talking to us about the people's budget, specifically in regard to housing and public funding for education. They have all the topics in the world to talk about, but we only have an hour and about 15 minutes. So we'll just focus on those two topics. And the timing and the purpose of this session tonight really is for them to share with us all of their knowledge and expertise, and also to inspire, incentivize, maybe not incentivize, but inspire and motivate us to pay attention to Governor Wolf's budget for 2021-2022 and to take productive, positive action to getting this puppy passed through our interesting state legislature. And of course, that's supposed to happen before June 30th. Fingers crossed, who knows, we could have a miracle. We will have a question and answer session at the end. We are scheduled to go until 8:15. So hang on, get a beverage, whatever, like stay with us. We'll have Q&A. And if you want to pose questions, like as the conversation's going, you can do so through the chat feature. Please know that chat is default set to go to everyone. So just know that it's as public as all of us are here together. If you want to keep your camera, I think on or off, it's fine, depending upon your technical bandwidth and maybe personal, emotional end of the workday bandwidth. Cameras off is fine. But please do be sure to mute your mics. So, we're not distracted by, I don't know, adorable puppies and children making noises in the background. I am going to look at my notes. I don't think I have anything else to say at the moment, but also feel free, again, you can chat me privately or the Lancaster Democrats account, which is DJ Ramsey, our brilliant tech guru who is working behind the scenes. So I will get out of the way and welcome, I think, Ricardo to welcome.
Great, thank you so much, Lisa. My name is Ricardo. I'm an organizing associate for the Pennsylvania Budget and Policy Center. So We the People PA is a campaign of, by, and for the people of Pennsylvania. Our goal is to ensure that everyone can thrive, no matter whether they are Black, brown, white, native born, or immigrant, Asian or Latinx, poor or rich, live in cities or in suburbs or rural areas. We call for decisive leadership and bold action from state lawmakers to keep our families safe today, and to build a stronger, healthier, and more just future. For too long, we have let politicians who serve the interests of corporations and the rich divide us on the basis of what we look like, where we come from, where we worship, or how much money we have. By dividing us, they have given us public policies that really do too little to help most Pennsylvanians while making the rich and corporations wealthier by the minute. So this people's budget presents us a once-in-a-generation opportunity to rebuild our communities and create an infrastructure for justice, beginning with the governor's budget proposal. So I have the presentation here, and let me pop it up in the screen. And in the meantime, if I can have my colleagues present themselves, we'll start off with Katie.
Hi, everyone. So happy to be here. My name is Katie Personette. I am Deputy Director of Campaigns with Pennsylvania Budget and Policy Center, one of those campaigns being We the People Pennsylvania. And I live in Montgomery County, right on the cusp of Berks County, so more Western. Again, happy to be here. Thank you so much for having us. I will pass to Nick.
Thanks, Katie. Ricardo. My name is Nick Presley. I am the Interim Director of Campaigns for the Pennsylvania Budget and Policy Center, and thus the We the People campaign. I am located in State College, Pennsylvania in Center County. Been here for about 20 years, give or take, but I've been to Lancaster. I really like that area. So happy to be here. Thanks, Ricardo. Kick it back to you.
Great, thank you so much. So this is in partnership, or rather, thank you, Lancaster County Democratic Committee, for hosting us for this educational opportunity to learn about the state budget and public policy. So the Pennsylvania Budget and Policy Center, we're a nonprofit research think tank that provides independent and credible analysis on the state budget and public policy. So our team decided it's not enough to just keep all of that data and information, and it's our job and our responsibility to share it out with Pennsylvanians. So this is a grassroots effort, and we have a number of partners, including CASA Pennsylvania, Black Voters Matter, Pennsylvania United, Make the Road Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania Stands Out, For Our Future Pennsylvania, Commonwealth Communications, Power, SEIU Healthcare PA, Six or State Innovation Exchange, and One Pennsylvania. We also have a list of over about 28 state legislators that also signed on to this People's Budget Initiative. So this is a grassroots level at its core, and we need to make sure we take this opportunity to really make a difference for the long term. So our goals for today, we want to look at critical budget decisions that need to be made by the end of June. June 30th is the budget deadline, right? And to take a deep dive into a few long-term budget issues. We also know that the pandemic has exposed deep inequities in our society, and ARP, or the American Rescue Plan, is an unprecedented opportunity to use the $7.3 billion to rebuild our communities and put us on a path to a just economy. We must also take advantage of this opportunity, right? So the American Rescue Plan and the 2021-2022 budget provides billions of dollars for dedicated relief. This is for schools, for small businesses, for renters, homeowners, childcare, and people that need it most. And it also provides $7.3 billion and $1 billion in other funds to make up for lost revenues, also to respond to the COVID-19 crisis, and to address long-term problems. So we have two options here regarding this the critical choice on how we spend this money, right? So option one, we could close deficits due to the impact of the pandemic on state revenues, which is about $3.8 billion, and invest in Pennsylvania with the rest, about $4.5 billion. And then option two, we could use all $8.3 billion to close not only pandemic-related deficits, but those created by irresponsible budget decisions, which includes, corporate tax cuts that have led to $4 billion in lost revenues per year. It also includes one-time revenues and budget gimmicks to balance the budget. So here's what we believe we should do. As I mentioned, we do a lot of research and data and public policy and state budget analysis, right? So we think that Pennsylvania should raise wages and also provide hazard pay. Essential workers are essential, right? We also want to expand the safety net. We want to reduce inequity in K-12 education and make college affordable. We want Pennsylvanians to be more educated, and we need to make it much more easy. We also want to reform taxes with the recovery grant for low-income Pennsylvanians. We also want to make sure that we support local businesses and start and sustain new businesses and boost our economy. We also want to make sure we expand rental assistance programs. Right. We also want to raise taxes on the wealthiest 1% and on Pennsylvania corporations that pay no taxes to fund these programs when the American Rescue Plan, when those funds eventually runs out. Many of us at our team, we've been looking very closely. We have an upside down tax system, and the top rich percent pay half of what the rest of us do. We also want to make sure we open all programs to immigrants, documented and undocumented. So here's what you can do. So we want everyone here on this call, and we want to talk to our neighbors. We want folks to jump on our action page and show support for the People's Budget. As I mentioned, this is a grassroots effort and we're building momentum. And we also want to make sure we share that out with our friends, our family members, our neighbors. And you can also host one of these events. Today we'll be focusing on housing and education, but we also have modules on taxes, on higher education, and the minimum wage. So if you want to host more or want to learn more, please reach out to us and we'd be happy to coordinate efforts to organize another people's budget presentation either here in Lancaster or wherever you live in your communities. Also, today marks 1 week until primary election day. So please, if you haven't done so, register to vote. Some of us probably already voted either by mail or some of us are waiting till election day. And even if you can't vote, whether you're underage or you just can't, I encourage you to talk to your neighbors and encourage them to exercise their right. All right, so we're going to kick it off with education here with Katie. She's going to give us all of the information on what Pennsylvania has in regards to education funding. Take it away, Katie.
Thank you so much, Ricardo. Okay, great. So we're going to start with K through 12 education funding. And before we get into the nitty gritty here, I want to take a moment to kind of paint a picture for you. So, imagine a Pennsylvania where every child receives a good education. What would that feel like to send our children to a great public school? Imagine what that would mean for your children's prospects in a world where good education is necessary to getting a good job. And imagine what that would mean for our economy if we encouraged every child without exception, Black, brown, and white, male and female, native born and immigrant, to make the best use of their talents and natural abilities. What would it mean if no one's talents and abilities were lost to us because they went to a school with overcrowded classrooms and inexperienced, untrained teachers in dilapidated buildings? Well, if you think about that, it should make you feel pretty good. This is the first step to breaking down economic, racial, and gender barriers to opportunity and to creating an economy that works for all of us to create great schools for everyone. So I'm going to continue to the next slide here. In this section, we're going to look at how the state funds K through 12 education. And we want to think about two questions here. So the first is whether school districts have an adequate amount of money to provide an adequate education according to state standards. Well, what does that mean? How do we determine that? We use the term funding gap to point to the difference between how much school districts spend per student and how much they need to spend to provide an adequate education. The amount needed to provide an adequate education was determined by a panel of experts as required by a state law passed in 2008 by a bipartisan majority updated for 2020. The second question that we want to look at and think about is how equitable is the distribution of education funding? Do all school districts have the same level of funding? Or do some districts, such as those in lower income communities or that have more Black and Hispanic students, have less money to spend? That is creating a larger funding gap. Well, we're going to actually address that first question right now. So if we can actually launch the first poll question on education. And so it says, which schools don't spend enough to give their students an adequate education? So something we just thought about, a couple answers for you to choose: schools and communities with a high proportion of households below the poverty line, schools and communities with a high and moderate proportion of households below the poverty line, or all schools. So I'll give you a minute or two, probably a couple more seconds to answer. There are no wrong answers here. This is an educational workshop. So this is to have fun. If you get it wrong, you're learning. So there is no shame in that. We'll give it about 5 more seconds. Great. Thank you so much. So it looks like about 4 of you chose schools and communities with a high proportion of households below the poverty line. So let's actually go to the next slide and look at the answer. So actually the answer is all schools. We have some of the most unequally funded schools in the entire country. Schools with a high proportion of households below the poverty line have a funding gap of over $3,000 per student. That means that schools need an additional $3,000 per student to provide an adequate education. Schools with the lowest proportion of households below the poverty line have a funding gap of about $300 per student. Their funding is far closer to adequacy than schools with the highest proportion of households in poverty, but they are still inadequately underfunded. So we're going to move to the next slide. And in this portion here, we're going to look at the funding gap, specifically the funding gap by race here. So there is great inequity between school districts with a high share and a low share of Black students. We see here that school districts with the highest share of Black students have a funding gap of over $2,600, and school districts with the lowest share of Black students have a funding gap of over $830. And so as we go to the next slide, we're going to look at the funding gap by Hispanic ethnicity. So schools with the highest proportion of Hispanic students have a funding gap of over $3,000 per student, while schools with the lowest proportion of Hispanic students have a funding gap of about $900 per student. We ask ourselves, and this is probably something you're thinking, why is it this way, right? Why are schools so inadequately and unfairly funded? Well, the state share of K-12 education funding is far below the national average. The national average on state spending is 50%, and we're at 35%. So there's your answer right there. School districts obviously have to make up the difference. Those schools in low-income communities can't raise as much for their schools, even if they have very high taxes, which many do. And Black and Hispanic students are more likely to be in low-income communities. In the 20 years leading up to 2014, the state had a fair funding formula that directed state aid to the school districts that needed it the most for only 3 years. It was politics, not fairness, that determined which schools got state aid. In 2015, the state created a fair funding formula that directed funds to school districts with high poverty rates, many students for whom English is a second language, and to other students with special needs. But the fair funding formula was only used to distribute new money added to the basic education funds of 2015. New money was added on top of the already unfairly distributed old money. So we're going to go to the next slide and talk about solutions. I gave you all this information, hit you with all these statistics and numbers. What does this mean? What can we do about it? So we're going to go to the next slide, and we're going to look at what Governor Wolf's 2021-2022 budget proposal would do. And so Governor Wolf's plan adds $1.35 billion in state aid to schools. The plan raises the percentage of state aid that goes through the fair funding formula from 11% to 85%. That's huge, right? This is a first step to creating good schools for everyone. We're going to go to the next slide. And we're going to talk and go back to the funding gap. We're going to look at the funding gap by income, race, and Hispanic ethnicity again, but talk about Governor Wolf's proposal and what that would do to the funding gap. And so Governor Wolf's proposal increases funding for all schools, but it increases it more for predominantly low-income school districts. So we see here that Governor Wolf's plan reduces the funding gap in school districts with predominantly low-income communities to a little over $1,600. The plan reduces the funding gap in predominantly high-income communities to about $193. We're going to move on to the next slide and look at the funding gap by race. So again, Governor Wolf's proposal increases funding for all schools, but it increases it more for school districts with a high share of Black students than a low share of Black students. So we see that his plan reduces the funding gap in school districts with the highest share of Black students to $1,493, compared to it would reduce the funding gap in school districts with the lowest share of Black students to $742. And finally, we're going to go to the next slide here and look at the funding gap by Hispanic ethnicity. So again, reiterating here, Governor Wolf's proposal increases funding for all schools, right? We talked about all schools suffer, and he increases funding for all schools, but increases it more for school districts with a high share of Hispanic students than a low share of Hispanic students. So when we look at the numbers here, his plan reduces the funding gap in school districts with the highest share of Hispanic students to $1,536, and then reduces the funding gap in school districts with the lowest share of Hispanic students to $805. All of this being said, these are big steps in the right direction, but there is not enough money to give all students an adequate education or totally eliminate ethnic inequity in school funding. So I'm going to kick it over to Nick, who's actually going to talk more about housing.
As soon as I find the unmute button, there we go. Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Ricardo. And thanks again, Lancaster Dems, for having us out here on here this evening. So another opportunity that we've got with the American Rescue Plan in the upcoming budget is to address our housing situation. But first, let's do another visualization exercise. Let's just take a few seconds and think about what having a home means. First, start thinking about this morning. What time did you wake up? Was it 8 o'clock-ish like me? Were you sleeping in a bed? Or did you watch too much Netflix or Hulu and fall asleep on the couch? When you woke up, did you take a shower and then get dressed? Were your clothes in a dresser, or were they still in the hamper like mine are sometimes? Or did you have to raid the laundry? What about breakfast? Did you get a chance to sit down and eat breakfast, or did you grab a bar to go and hop on your first Zoom meeting? Did you have to heat up something in the microwave or on the stove? If you have kids, you have to get your kids up and get ready for school? Did you have to get them to get dressed, force them to argue with them to eat something? How many times did you have to do that before they did it? And how many fights did you have about getting them to eat something? See, these are all parts of living in a home. Whether it's an apartment or a house or a mobile home, you had a place to sleep, a place to bathe, a place to get dressed, and a place to launch your day. Now imagine that you don't have a home. Maybe you lost your apartment after getting evicted and you're living with your aunt. It's you and the kids in one room. Maybe you sleep on the floor so they can have the bed. Maybe your clothes are in a gym bag or a plastic bag. You have to wait to get in the shower until your aunt and uncle are done. You don't have much food there, so you let the kids eat, and then you grab something from the Sheetz or the Wawa on your way to work. Or maybe you don't have a place to stay, or you didn't have a person to stay with, so you stayed in a shelter last night. You slept on a cot or in a chair since they were full. You kept your stuff and your belongings underneath your legs so that they would still be there when you woke up. And when the wake-up call came, you had to find a place to go hang out at for the day. Or maybe, like many in this state, you don't feel safe in the shelters, and so you slept on a bench or in a doorway. When I had you think about your morning just now, imagine having to deal with all of that if your day started out without having a home. That's why home is important, and as we all know, it is the foundation for everything. Can we move to the next slide, please? Let's start out by looking at a comparison of spending to show how the state budget prioritizes housing. Again, housing is the foundation for everything. It's known as literally the determinant of health, education, and employment. And yet, we don't even have a dedicated fund for rental assistance or utility assistance. If you look here, we've got the FAIR fund capped at 40 million, homeless assistance 18 plus a little bit. Housing or Human Services Development Fund is a little 13.5, and in the Keystone Communities is about 24.25. That comes up to $96 million a year. Meanwhile, we've got the Racehorse Development Fund, which is a fund that really helps to support the racehorse industry and primarily pays prize money to the rich owners of these racehorses, which has more than 200 million. We clearly have a priorities issue in this state. But how much does that affect us? Let's move to the next slide, and let's talk about what does it mean to be extremely low income in Pennsylvania. First, let's explain extremely low income, or ELI. And a household is considered to be extremely low income if the members make 30% or less of the area median income. So the middle income of an area or of a region of Pennsylvania, you are considered to be extremely low income if you make 30% or less of that income. Let's look at these three counties in Pennsylvania as a good example. First, you've got Mifflin County. It represents a rural population. It's right next door to where I live, about 30 minutes away. The area median income for Mifflin County is $56,200. And the average extremely low income, the ELI, for a family of four is $26,200. Montgomery County, on the other hand, has a suburban population. The area median income, or AMI, of Montgomery County is $96,600, which makes the extremely low income for a family of four, 29 grand. And then finally, we'll look at urban Pennsylvania with an example from Allegheny County. That's where Pittsburgh is. The AMI for Pittsburgh or for Allegheny County itself is $83,000, while the extremely low income is $26,200. All right, you ready for the first poll question? Let's get that launched, please. How many affordable rental housing units? We're going to go through. We're going to do the first one here. How many affordable rental housing units are available for every 100 extremely low income renter households? You got three options here: 38, 50, and 75. We're going to go ahead and answer the other two while we're at it, but let's do this first one first. Give you a few more seconds, then I'll scroll down and tell you what the next one is. All right, and so the second polling question that we've got on your screen: what percentage of extremely low income Pennsylvanians are severely cost burdened? Now, cost burden means having to spend more than 30% of your income on housing. Severely cost burden means you have to spend more than half of your income on housing. Two options here. Don't be shy, y'all. They're up on your screen. Just hit the button. Your multiple choice answers for the second question are 60, 70, and 30%. All right, let's go ahead and close this out and we'll move on to the next slide and give you the answers. So the first question: how many affordable housing rental units are available for every 100 extremely low income renter households? That's right, the majority of you got it, 38. For every 100 families or individuals who are extremely low income and looking for a place to live, there are only 38 places available that they can afford. That means a little bit of reverse math there. You've got 62 out of every 100 families who are homeless, doubled up, or living in unsafe housing conditions. Now, as for that second polling question, cost burden: what percentage of extremely low income Pennsylvanians are severely cost burdened? And the majority of you said 70%. Let's go to the next slide, please. That's right, 70% of extremely low income renter households, 70% people pay more than half of their income on rent. There is also a significant percentage of low and moderate income renters who are severely cost burdened. This is because housing, as the slide says, rent is too darn high. Housing prices are high, they keep rising, and yet wages remain stagnant. I mean, we're at the situation where our prices for rent here in rural Pennsylvania and State College are similar to prices in some areas of Philadelphia. Next slide, please. So how much do you need to work to afford rent in Pennsylvania? Well, as we see from this slide, a worker earning minimum wage in Pennsylvania, which is $7.25 an hour, would have to work 86 hours a week to afford rent. You'd have to make $19.23 an hour in a 40-hour work week to afford a 2-bedroom apartment in Pennsylvania. Now, this is all based off of the fair market rent, which is calculated by the Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, which is a survey of rents in Pennsylvania And it shows that $1,000 a month for a 2-bedroom apartment is what's considered fair market rent. We've got just a couple of quick fast facts here. There are a little over 1.5 million renter households. 31% of folks are renters, and the fair market rent for a 1-bedroom apartment is still $811 per month, which again on a minimum wage is unaffordable. Can we go to the next slide, please? So that brings us to the question: who is living in these ELI or extremely low income households? Who are living in these ELI households? Well, the majority of extremely low income renter households are seniors and disabled people, as we see this, but there are still a significant number of working people. 36% of people people who live in extremely low income households are in the labor force. Most of them work more than 40 hours a week. I'm not a big fan of just talking about problems without talking about solutions. So let's get to the next slide already, and let's talk about what is the solution. Well, the solution is, the next slide, please, to make housing a priority. We need to make housing a priority. We need to, for one thing, fund housing much better than we fund, more than we fund the racehorse industry, as we saw in the earlier slide. And we need to prioritize renter subsidies. One thing the American Rescue Plan has is renter subsidies, but we need to actually advocate for that money to get out to the renters equitably and efficiently and quickly, and that the state actually picks up the tab when the ARP ends. We also need to provide more funding to rehabilitate older, deteriorated homes for owners or homeowners and small landlords. We need to provide help for paying for utilities, especially with the freezing winters we get in some parts of the state and the very, very hot summers. And then we need to finally raise the minimum wage. Now, how do we do this? Those are modules for another time. We can talk to you about how to raise the minimum wage. We can talk to you about how we fix this broken tax structure to help fund this stuff after the ARP ends. And we could talk to you about how we can address the higher education needs as well. But first, what can we do? What can you do? Well, let's go to the next slide here. And once again, as Ricardo started off by helping us understand, the pandemic has exposed some big problems. They were all there. A lot of us knew about these problems already, but the pandemic has really laid them bare for us to see. And this is literally a once in a generation opportunity, a huge infusion of money from the federal government that can help us recover. And we can use this to rebuild our communities and create an infrastructure for justice. Next slide, please. So again, this is what we believe Pennsylvania should do. We should raise the wages, provide hazard pay, expand the safety net, reduce this inequity in K-12 education and make college affordable that Katie just talked about, reform taxes with a recovery grant to low-income Pennsylvanians. We, of course, want to support local businesses and start and sustain new businesses. This is a state of innovation. We want to expand rental assistance programs, raise taxes on the top 1% and the PA corporations that pay no taxes, which, by the way, it's a whopping 70%, and use that to fund these programs when the ARP money runs out. And of course, as always, all of these programs should be open to immigrants, documented and undocumented. So what can you do? Next slide will show you. Again, we dropped the link in the chat earlier, but please be a part of creating the people's budget. This is the budget that will tax the richest Pennsylvanians. It uses the ARP money, American Rescue Plan funds, to address these inequities we talked about. We dropped the action page in the chat. We will also send it out via email after this is over. Show support for the people's budgets. Urge your legislators to show support. Share with your family and friends. If you want to host your own event, there is another link we'll be dropping in the chat. And I realize there's a lot of links flying around, but we'll put another link in the chat to a Google form you can fill out. If you want to host one of these events or have us come and speak to your group or your friends, let us know, and we will get right back to you. And of course, 1 week from today, in 1 week and 30 minutes, the polls will be closed. So we want to make sure that we get out to vote. It's too late to register, but if you're already registered, go out and vote, turn in your mail-in ballot. If you have one, you can do it ahead of time. And you know what? We only had 2 modules, so that was very fast. We've got plenty of time left over. That gives us an opportunity to do questions. But let me first kick it back to Ricardo to help close us out.
Thank you so much. I was having trouble finding the mute button. So many things popping up on my screen. Sorry about that. But thank you so much for joining us this evening to learn about the people's budget. As I mentioned, this is a grassroots statewide effort to make sure that Pennsylvania works for all of us, not just the rich or the well-connected. We have an upside down tax system here in Pennsylvania where the rich pay half of what the rest of us do in taxes. And so today we talked about housing, we talked about education, but we have 3 more modules. We can always come back, or we can even help organize or host or co-host some of these events too. But before we get into a question and answer portion, I wanted to present our colleague here, Mark Steer, who's the Executive Director for the Pennsylvania Budget and Policy Center. Mark. You're muted. There you go.
Yeah, hi everyone. Nice to see you all. Sorry I had to join late, but I had a family event. Anyway, this crew of ours, they know this stuff inside and out. So good to see you, and thanks for inviting us to do this presentation.
Okay, so question and answer. So this is your time to ask us. We can develop relationships, we can just talk and have a conversation. So I noticed we have a few questions here in the chat. Did we cover all of them? Katie and Nick, I don't know, or is there anyone in the audience that would like to unmute themselves and ask?
I'll actually just reiterate the question that was posed from LG, because I'm sure a couple people are wondering. And so his question was asking from the K through 12 education portion. He asked about the $1.3 billion that Governor Wolf is proposing for state aid, and is that going to be something that's added this year or over 2 years? So I answered in the chat, but I just wanted to reiterate that answer, that the $1.3 billion would be added next year and then become part of the base of school funding. So which means it would be included in all subsequent years.
And excuse me, I'm sorry, I should just jump in and mention that just for crowd control, you can't unmute yourself, but if you raise your hand or throw something in the chat, DJ will happily unmute you.
Okay, thank you so much, Lisa, for that clarity.
Sure.
So I noticed there's a question in the chat. Can you tell us more about the People's Budget plan to make college more affordable? We could talk hours on education. In fact, we have a separate module on higher education. But let me kick that question over to the team. Katie, Nick, or Mark, would you like to talk about or give folks a little glimpse on higher education? Go for it.
Yeah, so I could just tease you, and then, of course, shameless plug for our for our module on it. I mean, we all know this is not a secret that, the state spends so little on K through 12, or excuse me, on higher education. We rank 47th in the nation, and that's below the national average. So it's disgusting. I mean, there are so many statistics that we have that we share with you in the module. But in regards to, kind of what the solution is, what the governor proposes, the Nellie Bly Scholarship Fund. So I'm not sure if you've heard that, but that would actually provide $200 million to help at least 44,000 Pennsylvania state system of higher education students afford college. So that's a little tease there for you, and we can go more into that. That's something that he's proposing. And certainly something that we support as well.
Thank you, Katie. So yes, that's a little tease. We have, as I mentioned, modules on taxes that we didn't cover today, higher education, and minimum wage that we can most certainly do in the near future. And all the links are in the chat. So please, if you're interested in organizing one of these events in the future, please let's connect. So we have a few more questions here in the chat. I'm loving all the interaction. So someone mentioned here, how can someone help? Even if they're not in Lancaster, for instance, if someone's willing to travel, or how can someone be part of the people's budget?
Well, you can definitely click on that link that we provided, put your name in there. It will tell you who your local legislators are, or you can contact one of your friends from Lancaster. There's another question in the chat that kind of ties into this. When should we start calling our Republican legislators from Lancaster County to lobby them on these issues? And like Katie just said, right away. The thing is, the budget process has to be finished by the end of June. We expect it to be finished a little bit, well, we're thinking there's a chance it gets finished before that. I mean, we know traditionally it's a down to the wire kind of situation, but that means that now is the time that we have to get these folks to move on this in the right direction. Mark, you look like you want to say something.
No, I think you're absolutely right. Contact your legislators now, use our online tool, and then make some phone calls. If if some of you want to get together and do a visit with some of your legislators and you want some prep before you go into that, we could help you do that. I would certainly, I don't know whether they're letting people come visit them now yet, but you could always invite them to a Zoom call, and we'd be happy to give you some prep. The key thing right now is, are they going to use the $7 billion for Pennsylvanians, or are they going to, bail out the state for all the mistakes they've made in the past? The deep corporate tax cuts that cost the state $4 billion a year. So that, I would put them on the spot sooner rather than later.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mark. And that's a great question. Another question we have here in the chat is renter and other housing assistance in WOOF's proposed budget?
I can answer. There really is not much in his budget, but there is a lot in the CARES Act, and then there was a lot in the recovery plan. Now, the CARES Act money wasn't spent well. There was $175 million available for rental assistance. The Republicans created a plan, and frankly, the Wolf administration didn't help very much with it. That just wasn't workable. It limited how much assistance a landlord could get. It required landlords to sign on to it. They spent, I think, about $10 million of the 175, and then the rest went to prisons. But there's new money in the recovery plan. If I remember correctly, it's 250 million or more. The recovery plan is so huge, I can't always remember all the amounts off the top of my head. But they created a new program after the CARES Act program failed. And from what I'm hearing from housing advocates around the state, it's actually working, and there's a lot of money for it. So we don't expect money in the budget beyond what's coming from the CARES Act. So, and that's fine. Our real concern is over the long term. What happens when CARES Act money runs out? Traditionally, we have tried to deal with housing by building low-income housing, by subsidizing developers to do it. Our thinking now is it's a much more effective thing if we just give people subsidies. There's housing available. People can't afford it. And I think if we give people subsidies, they'll be able to afford it. Maybe giving landlords money to rehab their properties so they come up to code would be useful as well. But we'd like to see the money go to the hands of people, not in the hands of big developers anymore, because that's a really costly and not terribly effective way of making sure people can afford housing.
Thanks, Mark. Thank you so much. Marquise, I see you asked in the chat, what if we did a clothing drive to help these kids out? Yeah. Look, I'm a huge fan of solidarity. I'm a huge fan of man, I always keep forgetting this word.
Mutual aid.
Mutual aid. There we go. Yes, and we out in Center County, we've got some similar things that we try to do along those lines. We do food drives for folks who are in need. I mean, yes, if that's something that y'all can get together and do, and then let your legislator know you're doing it because they're not doing their job and getting you the funds you need in order to take care of your families. Great question. And then Diane asked, what are the other options to fund school systems other than property taxes? What do other states do? I've heard nothing but good things about Sterla. I don't actually have a lot of information on other states, so.
I can answer that. The biggest thing they do is they put more money from state government. Property taxes are a local thing. The national average for all states, it's about 50% of local school district expenses come from the state. Pennsylvania, it's only about 38%, way below, which means we're really relying on local school districts far more. And most of them only tax property. Some also have earned income taxes, which again only taxes wage income. It doesn't tax business profits, or royalties, or rents and things like that. So the first thing we need to do is we just need to have a lot more state aid, and ideally that would come from new state taxes that tax well-off people and untaxed corporations. But it's got to come from the state. If we could boost. What our recommendation is, get up to about at least 50% state funding, use that money to direct it so that more money goes to the funding formula, more money goes to historically underfunded districts, many of which are Black, but not all of which are majority Black, and then have some targeted property tax relief, because there are certain parts of the state where property taxes are really just out of sight. And there tend to be places where growing areas where there've been a lot of new school construction and a lot of expenses associated with that. Whereas there are lots of parts of the state where population is declining, and yet they still keep the amount of money they got from the state for schools, and their property taxes are really low. So it's a terribly inequitable system all around. And I see it's from my old friend Diane Tabak, not my old friend, my longtime friend. We don't say old friends anymore. We're too old to say that.
I do have a question for you, Mark, and I wanted to share with folks. There is some legislation in place. There's housing security legislation that Nikhil Saval and Katie Muth have introduced recently that would help property owners, landlords, and renters through mortgage deferment and rent forgiveness. Can we talk a little bit about that? Do you have more details?
I don't have more details on that legislation. It's some new ideas that they've come up with, but it's similar to what I'm suggesting. That is, we need to provide subsidies for people who were paying way above the norm for their housing, and we could do it by subsidizing rents, or we could do it by helping people buy houses. A lot of times, if you're a middle class person and you're buying your first house, your parents can give you $10,000 or $15,000 as a down payment. If you're not a middle class person and you don't have that help, you probably could make a mortgage payment, but you just can't get started. The state could provide funds to help people get started. They can even ask you to pay it back over 30 years, and it wouldn't cost the state anything, but it would just even out the opportunities for people that are so unequal in our society.
Yeah, I live in an area where rent is more expensive than mortgage payments, and yet I can't afford a house, so I can't get a house, right? So I'm stuck being a renter and paying more, and so this system is extremely upside down, just like Mark was saying.
We have a hand up here, person with an LG Style 04. I'm not quite sure what your name is, but please introduce yourself and ask your question.
Okay, Brad, go ahead. Brad, okay, can you, maybe, Brad, can you unmute yourself? I cannot tell.
He says that he's unmuted.
Shoot.
Can you hear that then?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, cool. So my question was about with housing rather than just like I remember hearing about this housing plan probably like 4 years ago, that it was in which they paid to build the houses, and they would give help get people give mortgages to them so that they could build it out. But then they would have to sell the house instead of sell it onto the open market. They would have to sell it back to the state. So you keep the building cost down. So you keep that revenue. So then people can build up a mortgage. They have to sell it back to the state for, they would still get a profit. They would still get a certain percentage of that. But rather than letting housing costs dictate how much that housing costs, then the state would then maintain that house like over years, so that you're getting more dividends back from the house, because you've kept that on, and then you give it to a mortgage to another person, allow them to build up enough wealth for themselves with that house until they can then, if they sell it back, then they sell it back to the state or whatever the organization is. I don't know if that's been something that's been thought about. Sorry, I hope that makes sense. I don't know if it does.
Well,
I remember hearing about Vermont had certain programs like that before.
Not only has it been thought about, but it's something that we did in 19th century America. There were all kinds, there's a lot of experimentation in 19th century America with people homesteading and land become available to them. So that's the equivalent of your parents giving you a down payment. You get the land, you build your own house. But there's all kinds of experiments like the one just talking about. And we really should be creative. There are lots of ways to help people not just have a house, but build up the equity in the house. And that's a really important point, because one of the great inequities in our society, and this is a racial as well as a class inequity, is that some people have had opportunities to build up wealth. And for most middle-class people, most of their wealth is in their house. But if if you're a Black family in the 50s and you're redlined, you can't get a mortgage. And if you live in Philadelphia or in inner cities, redlining happened everywhere. Every city in this state had redlined areas. And if you're a low income person, you can't afford a mortgage. So that creates generational inequity, generation after generation. And an idea like yours, where we're helping people to build up equity in homes, is a way to combat that. That's a really good idea. We're just getting into housing recently, and I'll tell you why we're getting into housing. That's because when we started We the People, we did a bunch of community conversations, and everywhere we went in the state, people said, talk about housing. And I had been in Harrisburg at that point 2.5 years, and I had never heard anyone talk about housing in the General Assembly. So I said, this is something we needed to work on. So we will look into that idea, Brad, and others, and we're hoping to have a couple of policy papers on housing over the next year.
If you have any other questions you think about after the event is over, please feel free to let the Lancaster Dems know, and they'll let us know, right? And we can work to get you answers. Any other questions, comments?
Gone. I mean, we can hang out and I can let an uncomfortable silence hang, because I teach undergraduates and I drive them crazy.
Did we get all the questions in the chat answered? I think, yep. Diane, did we get Diane's question answered?
Yep. We just have to and just make sure that we let Marquise know if there's any good events around you. Yep. Yeah. You ever find yourself in State College, please look me up.
And Brad, if you get any sources on that housing ideas, please send it our way, because as I said, we really want to look into this. We're looking for creative ideas.
I just dropped my email in the chat. Feel free to reach out with any ideas or comments or anything, okay?
I learned a lot. I kind of knew, right? But now I've got numbers and notes and statements. And I just, very much appreciate just the truth, right? You are truth telling in a beautiful manner. love the PowerPoint, but also the storytelling, right? Like helping us think about our own situation with housing and with public funding for education, and good God, the property taxes, like what the heck? So not seeing any more questions, but speaking slowly so people can capture what's in the chat. Just want to, Marquise, do you have a question, or were you like waving goodbye, or? Oh, I can't. I can't. I think he's okay. Sorry, I wish I understood hand signals better. Oh, here, let me.
Hello?
Go ahead, you're on, go ahead.
Okay, so I actually don't know much about what's going on, but just listening to you guys for the little bit that I have listened, it was pretty insightful. But from what I can get from it, the people that need the most help are the most distracted by the problem and the inflammation of the problem. So that's why I said, like, why not do something local, or just, get people out to at least give them the chance to be educated. Because when they come out, they'll probably be like, okay, they're giving away canned goods, or kids' clothes, or whatever it is that the event is, but just a way to get them to care. Because me personally, I live in West Philadelphia. Most people, poverty is like very common. So most people just don't have the time to listen to this stuff, because it sounds so like, and not to sound condescending, but it comes off as something that is more preeminent than the average, Black American, or the guy that looks like me. Like, just finding a way to reach them or make them care about the problem, I think is going to make a huge difference, because we can care all day. And I love the energy, and we can keep the same energy. All of you could, but just me personally, just being out here for so long and knowing, what people go through. A lot of people, they don't care about what you know until they know that you care. So, we have to reach people. In my opinion, that's one of the best ways.
Yeah, and thank you so much, Marquise, for joining us. You have an extremely valid point. We have to meet folks where they are. We are becoming more inclusive. We had this presentation in Spanish as well. We also have a TikTok. We're making this fun. We're making this sexy, at least as much as I can without showing cleavage, I guess. But we want to make sure that we include everyone in these policy discussions, whether they speak English or not. And we're open to even doing it in other languages, or even in ASO. We have so many connections at the state level, even at the national level, to have these discussions in wherever they may occur or happen, right? So yeah, thank you so much, Marquise, for joining us. And it's an uphill battle, right? But it's all of us or none of us, and we all have to get involved.
And you're right. It takes a combination, right? Like you gotta be out in the streets, but you can't just be out in the streets. You also gotta be in the boardroom or in the room where it happens. And so a lot of this stuff is over the head of the average, Black folk living in West Philly, because it's targeted at the legislator. But at the same time, we need to activate those folks. And so there are other efforts that are going on. And what you're talking about, Marquise, is exactly part of that, right? We're not really doing anything in person just yet, but I could totally see something where we combine, a mutual aid type project with education on these budget issues and why it's important to advocate for yourself, right? And it may look differently depending on where in the state we are, but that's definitely something that I continue to think about on a daily basis. So I really appreciate you raising that.
But at the end of the day, when we know better, we do better. And as mentioned, the budget deadline is fast approaching, which is why we're doing these presentations now. And we have how many scheduled, Nick? We have a number of them all over the state, from Philly, Reading, Allentown, Erie, Lancaster. We're doing them all over because it's a statewide state budget, right? And these funds, we all pay taxes, right? We pay local, municipal, state taxes, federal taxes. So our state government, they control that state money. And if we're not involved in these issues, then, you know, they're going to make decisions with or without us at the table.
Okay, I see a lot of well-educated people, more informed people. I just want to say, yes, thank you all so much. I mean, thank you to the presenters. Thank you everyone for attending and for asking good questions. I mean, yeah, I mean, Ricardo, everything you just said, right? I mean, the people in Harrisburg, oh my God. Anyway, we need to communicate with the people in Harrisburg.
Yes.
I'll leave it at that. So I think we will conclude in a couple of seconds. If there's any last minute anything, thank you so much for busy street, for putting all of the links into the chat and for your email messages. I feel like we are comfortable getting back in touch with any of you about any of this. And then to our LCDC people, like, let any of us know if you have any questions. We can convey information to the people's budget folk. This was awesome. And yes, we are feeling good. All right, we're all feeling good. We're all looking good. Y'all beautiful too. Have a good night. Thank you all so much. And like, oh my God, call Harrisburg, call all of them.
Follow us on social media. We have all of the things. We have Facebook, Twitter. We even have TikTok. Katie and I have created some really awesome videos. It's a lot of fun. So check us out. We the People Pennsylvania, We the People PA on all of the platforms.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining
Thank you.
Take care.